Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience podcast, inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Frances Richards.
What happens in Vegas goes all over the world on Black Entrepreneur Experience episode number 457. Thank you for joining us as we elevate the Black Entrepreneur Experience by interviewing CEOs, thought leaders, innovative thinkers, and Black entrepreneurs across the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards. Our next guest is striving to create a more inclusive and mentally healthy society by breaking down barriers and spreading awareness through the use of her journals and ADHD-friendly planners. As the creator and founder of the Squared Paper Company. Welcome, Jordan Nash.
Hello. I'm very excited to be here today.
I've given our audience such a brief bio. Why don't you fill in the gaps and share with our audience what you would like them to know about you and your company?
So, hey y'all, I am Jordan. I am what I would consider to most likely be a serial entrepreneur. I've run a couple different businesses over the years. I think my business desire really started during my time at Spelman College, where I started like a thriving freelance graphic design and web design business. And from there, that naturally evolved into the Squared Paper Company. I was using so many notebooks that, it only made sense to start financing them myself instead of spending a huge amount of money in Target every other week purchasing new ones. And now I am passionately full-time in the stationery space. I love designing I design lots and lots of new products on like a pretty consistent basis, doing some partnerships with some other Black entrepreneurs for like more customized products, looking to work with HBCUs, doing a lot of give back work through the Squared Paper Company. And that's kind of the gist of who I am.
Talk about ADHD-friendly paper. What does that mean?
So one of the primary goals with the planner was to shift away from the traditional planning method. I'm one of those people who has bought and tried just eons and eons of different types of planners. And one of the things that I found myself consistently struggling with, and I was watching my friends consistently struggle with, especially my friends with ADHD, is the fact that planners are designed to be extremely restrictive in terms of how they're set up. And so you got to think about the way the pages are laid out and everything is attached to specific dates on specific months. And it left people with a lot of guilt when, you miss a day in your planner and now you feel like you have to throw the entire thing away because now you've like messed up your schedule. You have to skip a bunch of pages and all of these things have gone to waste. And that's a common theme that I saw amongst the community of people with ADHD, the amount of guilt they feel for not being able to keep up with their tasks or not being able to complete their tasks. So when I created the perpetual planner, my goal was to do a system of like guilt-free planning. And so all of our months are separated from all of our weeks and the days you fill in yourself. And so if you start on a Monday and you miss Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, that's fine. The next slot next to Monday, you can write Friday and you can pick up from there without wasting pages of your planner, without feeling like you have to skip through a bunch of things. It allows you to just pick up wherever you left off without feeling like constricted and trapped in this like traditional planning binary. And so that was really one of the goals, to remove like all of that guilt and that stress and that anxiety that comes with maintaining planners, remove from the equation and let people move at their own pace through the product so they get a lot more use out of it and don't have to deal with all the stress or just the general like waste of missing pages in your planner.
That is absolutely brilliant. I'm a planner and I started with Franklin Covey, and it was brilliant how Franklin Covey evolved in terms of the planner. And so I love what you said, Jordan, about someone feeling like they waste their planner. Now, I'm the type of person, I don't like to waste. And so I recycle everything. So even in my planners, I'm like writing on the top, on the bottom, on the side. But I hear what you're saying. It's a couple of planners that I found, but it didn't exactly do what I needed to do as an entrepreneur. So I think that is really insightful for you that you saw that it's a guilt-free planner. You also talk about inclusiveness in your whole business model. Talk about that.
So one of the things that I realized when I was launching the Squared is that there are so many different people that use different types of notebooks and planners. I have very specific use cases for my planners. I literally have drawers and drawers full of notebooks and planners, and I was always using them to sketch. And I was one of those people that really liked dot grids because you could create your own layouts in that manner. But working with my friends, I have close friends who were in school for fashion or close friends who were in school for more traditional majors who really needed the lines. And so my goal was to create flexible products that were for everybody, and they were very simplistic in nature. I think when you look at like the notebook and planning space, you have a couple big names who kind of have a monopoly on the industry. And one of my goals was when I launched in 2020 was to one, bring a Black face and a Black brand into that space because there were so little. And I wanted people who were purchasing these paper products to be able to purchase them from a Black owned company and be able to have like the simple and minimalistic things. In my opinion, the more simplistic you keep your designs and more minimum, the more people you can actually serve because people don't feel like they're being like boxed out or blocked out. And so for people who need the traditional lines, we have lines. For people who wanted a more flexible layout, you have dot grids. But there's a little something for everybody to find or create their needs within our product suite.
What is something that we as consumers don't know about the notebook and planning space that we should?
Oh, there are so many things that people don't know. I think one of my favorite things, the thing that's most relevant to me, is you do not have to be stuck with pages that bleed through. I think we get really used to like, there are so many like cheap notebooks out on the market. At every event you go to, they always like give their swag bag and there's always like a little notebook in there. And I cannot stand pen bleeding through paper. And so once I discovered this space where like I could customize like the literal like thickness, and I mean we're talking in millimeters here, like how thick the paper is, to ensure that you're having like a very like gratuitous writing experience. I think because society has moved so far away from pen and paper and everything's done digitally, people have kind of lost the art of really putting pen to paper and creating things. And so I think when you're choosing notebook and paper brands, I think we should move back to a space where we're actually being intentional about the brands that we're choosing to put money in and making sure that people are getting a high quality product, because it is possible in 2022 to get a really, really high quality notebook without breaking the bank. And I think people have kind of given up on that just because the paper market is such a saturated market. You have like your college line spiral notebooks that you use all throughout school. And I think there are so many other niche spaces for people to really fall in love with that type of product again. And that's my goal, is like to really create notebooks that people like fall in love with and are obsessed with and like constantly rebuy. I have friends who treat them like Pokemon and like collect all the colors. And I wanted to like bring that joy back. Like when you think about educating, you like all those papers that you colored and all those drawings that you kept. Even now, like my goddaughter, I keep her art on my fridge because I love the things that she's done on paper. It's not the same as if she were to draw me a picture on her iPad. I want the paper and I want to be able to store it in a box for years to come and like have it forever. But that comes with like the quality of the products you're actually engaging with. Paper is a crazy space, I tell you. People know very little about the paper space. I knew very little about the paper space when I got started.
And tell us that backstory about you actually really coming into the paper space, because you came from what is really phenomenal, really a digital space into the paper space. And it seems like they're polar opposite.
Yes. It's funny your choice of word being phenomenal, because the company that I actually ran was called Phenomena Media Group. I founded my digital media company when I was in college. Unfortunately, I lost my brother when I was in college, and as a coping mechanism, I got really, really into digital design. And that's just how I kept myself busy. I was one of those people that like kept a laptop. Like my laptop or my iPad was coming with me everywhere because I just needed that to cope and get through college. And I think getting so caught up in that space, one, I was running through a lot of notebooks on pen and paper because I realized I could not ideate the way that I wanted to and create the way I wanted to if I was sketching on my iPad. It just never came out the way I needed it to. And so I decided at some point to switch back into pen and paper. And I got really into bullet journaling and creating my own spreads and allowing myself to unleash some creativity that way, or for all my preliminary creativity to go that way, and then transition it into digital design. And so I was a part of what some call lucky and some say unfortunate, but I was the COVID class of 2020 when I was graduating college. And so I spent a lot of time at the end of my senior year in my apartment by myself. And so at that point, I was like rapidly creating, and I was doing like all these design challenges. And I mean, I was running through notebooks like they were water. And I was talking about this frustration of the fact that in 2020, there was this huge movement to shift towards Black owned brands because that coincided with like this big uptick in like the protests all around the country for Black Lives Matter. And the one thing I could not find was Black owned stationery brands that were minimalistic. There were a lot of them that had the motifs of like Black women or Black girls, like the puff balls are like Black power fist. And while all of those art forms are beautiful and have their space, I was one of the people that like, if I could have a plain Black notebook every single day, I just kept rebuying the same Black notebook. That's all I wanted. Again, my style is super duper minimalist. And so I was complaining to my mother on the phone, and one of my childhood best friends, her name is also Jordan, about the fact that I could not find a Black owned brand in the notebook space that like offered what I wanted. And my mom, knowing that I'd already like been growing my graphic design business for years, was like, create one, like make it yourself. And I was like, how the heck do you start a paper company? And she was like, I don't know, but I know you could probably figure it out. And so in talking to my friend Jordan, who was in school for fashion design at the time, so she was sketching a lot, I was like, what if you started a paper company? And she was like, love the idea, don't have the time to do it. But if you need like creative support or creative input, like I would love to do it. And so I talked through a lot of my initial ideas with my friend Jordan. And that's also how the namesake of the company came about. As children, we met in elementary school and we were both around like the same height, very similar skin tones. We both had like light colored eyes. And so people used to call us Jordan Squared because people thought we like favored each other and we had the same name. And we met via, she introduced herself and was like, I'm Jordan. And I was like, I'm Jordan. And we had the same outfit from Children's Place on in different colorways, if anybody's familiar with like the OG Children's Place. And so we looked a lot alike. We became Jordan Squared all throughout elementary school. And so when I decided to name the company kind of to honor like where the roots and the initial conversations from the company came, it became The Squared, just because I like the idea of things being squared. And so that's kind of how The Squared was born. I started with like this super duper small run of products with like all neutrals. It was like olive greens and like really rich browns and tans and like blacks. My initial product run, and I was like, I'm just gonna like launch this on pre-sale and see what happens. I created all of the original collateral myself using my graphic design and web design background and launched it. And it did really, really well on initial launch. People were very, very interested in the idea of like this small Black owned paper company, which is just not something I was honestly expecting. And from there, it's only grown. I got begged for planners for about 2 years before I actually even forayed into that space, just because I wanted to create something really, really unique. And earlier this year, I launched the planners and now we're here.
Thank you for that. Congratulations. And so sorry for the loss of your brother. I want you to have a thank fest. I want you to thank situations, individuals, and people, places, and things that have impacted your life. Have at it.
Oh, there are so many things I could say. I first, of course, have to say thank you to my parents. I think I'm one of the people that was blessed to have not only my biological parents, but I had step parents, so which I grew up calling bonus parents. And so I think all of my parents really like fed into me. And like I never was one of the people who was taught to believe that I couldn't do all the things I wanted. I was just one of those people that like was raised to believe that like I could be excellent. I was excellent, and I rock for that. And I also think that growing up, my parents had to put a lot of faith in just like letting me make the decisions with my life that I wanted to make. Even if they disagreed or they were scared about my life plans, I've been allowed to just take the reins of my own life and run with them. And so when I decided to go to Spelman, I was the first of my siblings to go to college. I'm one of 7. And I went to college very far away from home, 14 hours to be exact. And my parents did not love that decision. I chose to go to a really expensive college, and I dug my feet in the sand about the fact that I was going to go to Spelman or I was not going at all. And my parents just had to have faith, and it ended up working out. I ended up getting like a full tuition scholarship at Spelman. Or when I decided to run my businesses, I decided once I was done with college to leave Atlanta on a whim. I moved to Charlotte for about a year. My parents were like, that sounds crazy. Why would you do that? But they let me do it. And I think so much of my life has just been a compilation of me making these decisions that probably didn't make sense to my parents at the time, but they got me to where I was. So I have to thank them, of course, for just having faith in the plans that I was going to execute and just believing that it would happen. I also have to say, like, a huge thank you to my like childhood best friends, of course, Jordan being the one I spoke about earlier. We had a third friend, a part of our trio. Her name is Cassidy. She has been my pea in a pod for my entire life. And I think having someone who like you can constantly look at, and I don't have to explain myself to Cassidy. I don't have to like justify any of the decisions I make. Cassidy is just standing 10 toes down behind me, every single aspect, and always there to cheer me on. Regardless of if she gets it or not, she's not going to ask for an explanation. She just gets how my brain works. I also have to say thank you to my college besties, Ashley and Leilani. We all lived together when we were in college. And I think so much of who I am was because of who they were and our experience living with each other. I lived with them immediately after losing my brother. We weren't even friends at the time. We were like randomly assigned in college housing, and now they are my literal best friends. I would not have been able to breathe at that time of my life without them. Even to like, I think I've had like the best roommates ever. My most recent roommate, her name was Tiana. Like I was running my business and filling her entire garage with inventory, and she just like had faith to let me rock and like rock out and do it and take up this space. And there are just so many people who like have breathed so much. I'd just be talking all day if I had to thank everybody. But so many of my friends who just like breathed life into my business. It's very bizarre to have a friend who runs a stationery company, but these are the same friends, especially my significant other. His name is Earl. We love him. Who was at my warehouse with me for hours on end, like packing my first big store order. There are just so many people who like, in understanding what I was doing was a very niche space and very random, who've just always had like complete and utter faith in what I was doing. And I think without people having like blind faith in the businesses and the life that I was creating for myself, I just would not be here without them.
You talked about Spelman in your major. What did you major in?
My major is something, albeit completely random, but I love it. I'm actually majored in comparative women's studies with a concentration in digital media. One of my primary focuses was looking at the way that Black women were represented in popular media and like seeking to unpack that representation and figuring out like if Black women could change the representation online, the best way to go about that. And so I heavily focused on that through all 4 years of my career. I love my degree. It's one of my favorite things that I've ever studied. I love my professors. If I ever pivoted again in my career, I'd probably go into academia and I would go teach or like do public speaking all about like Black women media, like the concept of Black girlhood and all of that. Like it's just, it's my bread and butter.
I want you to have a monologue, Jordan. I want you to name this person, living or not, and they've inspired you so much. Who is that person and what are you saying to that person?
That is such, ooh. Right now, I think it would change at any given point in my life, but right now I'm actually going to give it to one of my women's studies professors. Her name is Beverly Guy-Shefdahl. If you know anything about the women's studies space, you might be familiar with her work. But a lot of the textbooks that we read in our major were actually written by her, which I think is like a very cool thing. And so I was going to say anything to Beverly Guy-Shefdahl is one, I want to thank her for having so much belief in me and faith in me. I pride myself in being, or at that time, I really like took pride in the fact that I was an excellent student. In the one semester that I was in her class, excellence is everything but what I was just really getting beat up and like enjoying college a bit too much in that semester. And I ended up actually having to retake the class the next semester to graduate. But there's a way in which she was able to handle me with such a level of grace in class and like a elder in like the Black woman community, like down to her students. And I think a lot of professors are willing to give up on students when they don't see them like performing well. She had no reason to like believe in me and like believe in like my thought processes in the way that I worked. And so it's her like she does have so much faith in her students and like the women that come through Spelman College and the women that come through her department and the way that she moves about that space with grace and the way that she imparts so much of like the legacy of Black womanhood into what she teaches and the way she pours into us and in the way that she also pours into our community. If you're familiar with Bell Hooks, she was actually a very close friend of Bell Hooks. And so during COVID, we're like hearing updates about like Bell Hooks and like how her health is going because that's her peer group. And I think she set the space for like this legacy of Black womanhood and she holds a space for this legacy of Black womanhood inside of Spelman. And I think, of course, Spelman is a women's college. So everybody believes in like the power of Black womanhood. But I think the spaces that Beverly Guy-Shefdahl creates and holds were just so unique that like there were just never enough words to thank her enough for like the professor that she was to me at my time at Spelman. She's the absolute best. Give her an award, like put a plaque up of her somewhere.
Is she aware that you feel this way?
Yes, she knows that I absolutely love her. I sent her when I graduated in 2020, because like I said, I graduated via her. That was like the way if she had not let me back into her class with such grace and really helped me get out, I would not have graduated on time. And I sent her a very, very long and loving email. And I try and keep in contact with as many of my professors from Spelman as I can. COVID obviously presented a pretty big challenge with that because everyone was kind of like scattered. And then professors shifting to online, I think it's stressful for any professor who did not teach in that way beforehand. But she knows that I love her. One of my absolute favorites, permanently indebted to her because, like I said, I love my degree from Spelman College. I'm very happy to be a Spelman alum. And I think every other professor that I was met with would be like, oh, Jordan was an excellent student. And like, if they loved me, it's probably because I was an excellent student. She chose to love me even when I was far from an excellent student. And I think that's where like leadership really comes in, was like through her and the way that she chose to show up as a professor.
Jordan, you dropped some huge value bombs in that statement. And what's interesting is HBCU. And I see a different take on life with individuals that have graduated from an HBCU. And I did not go to an HBCU. And so I've interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs over the years that have graduated. And I just see a different type of confidence, standing in power of truth. Speak on that. And I don't know if you really have, and I'm comparing myself or to individuals that I've met over the years. I'm just seeing, and it could be just a different era of people coming up. But even I have a friend who graduated from Spelman in the same time that I graduated. I just see a difference. Do you want to speak to that?
I think a lot of it has to do with the way in which when you choose to go to an HBCU, you're required to advocate for yourself in a different manner. I actually went to a private PWI high school and middle school when I was growing up. And that experience like would have taken me out of the game. Like it would have taken everything from me. It was a very, very hard environment to be in. It was very like racialized environment to be in, especially, and like there were a lot of like class divisions as well. So coming into that type of environment where like I do not have the type of money that these students have, and I do not have the skin color that these students have, which means I was not really poured into in that environment. Like Black students were just kind of like floating through. I made a decision in 9th grade. I do not know where Spelman came from in my mind. To this day, people ask where I wanted to go there. So I really couldn't tell you. I have no clue where I heard about Spelman first from. But I decided in 9th grade that I wanted to go to Spelman, and I like ran towards that like fervently when I was in high school. And then when I got to Spelman, anybody who's gone to an HBCU, like will tell you, going to an HBCU, we're like historically underfunded. It is quite a struggle to go to a school like that, to find money to stay at a school like that. I have lots of friends who like couldn't afford to stay, and so they leave. And Spelman has this motto called "Undaunted by the Fight." I don't know if I agree with that motto. I feel like I was quite daunted during my years at Spelman, but there's also a way in which that I was poured into and taught to advocate for myself in that space that made me feel like once I left Spelman, some people call us a cult, but like anybody who you know went and graduated from Spelman, like we think that Spelman is the best college. Like we're ranked number one as an HBCU, but like honestly, I think we should be ranked number one out of like all colleges on the planet. Like I think we beat out all the high Ivies because it's Spelman, and there is no space that I think gives and loves on their students and requires as much from their students as a college like Spelman does, because Spelman is very aware that once we leave the gates of Spelman, the real world is not going to be kind to us, and they're not going to value the education that we have. We will be looked at like HBCU graduates are not valued the same way in workspaces as like people who go to Ivies are, even though our schools are just as competitive, if not harder, because we're also dealing with like racism and all those things on top of like just trying to get college educations. There are just a lot of stereotypes that are put on HBCUs. People talk about the way our campuses are. So you spend not only 4 years like fighting to get your degree, but you spend 4 years also like defending your college and like defending the validity of your education. And I think once you fought that hard to like walk through, we have this arch that you walk through at graduation. Once you fought that hard to walk through that arch, there's kind of nothing that can tear you down at that point, because at the end of the day, like I'm a Spelman College graduate, and I think the way that you're brought into alumnihood, we have this beautiful ceremony called the March Through the Arch, And I experienced it 2 years late because again, I graduated during COVID. But even 2 years after it was supposed to happen, they take all of the alum, they start with the alum from the oldest class that is like still living and present. And she walks through the arch first, and all of the alum go through first in order of their class. And like it's reunion years. So you have people who graduated like in the 50s and the 60s and all that, and they all walk through. And then you get to your current graduating class, and typically you're in your graduation regalia. For me, I was an alum 2 years out by the time I did it, but they made a point to like do something special for 2020. And as you walk through the arch, and it's the only way you're considered an official Spelman woman is to have walked through this arch, you are greeted on the other side by years and years and years of Spelman women who walked that path before you. And the way that they like cheer you into alumnihood is one of those things where it's like, you feel like you're walking into a force. And so the thing is, all of my best connections, all of my best networks came from Spelman College. All of my businesses were like originally supported by Spelman women. And when you walk into that space and you walk through that arch and you walk and take your like place among that force of women, there's nothing in this world that I feel like I can't do, because 9 times out of 10, any opportunity I want, I can find somebody who went to Spelman, who knows somebody or is in that space that I want to be in. They're going to find a way to get me there off the strength of that Spelman connection. And I think when you know that you have that network and that environment and that love to fall back on, why wouldn't you have the confidence of, like, I don't carry the confidence of myself. I carry the confidence of myself and every other single Black woman who has also walked through that arch at Spelman College and has also lived that exact same journey, even if we did it 50 years apart. I get to carry the confidence of those women too, but I get to stand on the shoulders of those women for any opportunity that I could ever want in this world. I'm going to have it, and I know that because I went to Spelman, and why wouldn't I have it?
See, Jordan, you just dropped the bomb and you just did a commercial for Spelman. Like, I am like, let me go get a degree from Spelman, right? You use an acronym, and I don't know if the audience is familiar with it, PWI.
Yes. Predominantly white institution.
Okay. And then just share for the audience to HBCU.
And that's historically Black college or university. And so they're also, I guess with PWIs can apply to colleges, and they can apply to like middle schools, high schools, and like lower level schools. So like before you get to college, HBCUs applies to only the collegiate level. PWI also applies to like private schools and like private schooling or public schooling. Like most public schools in the country would probably be also considered PWIs just based on their student population.
Okay, so I went to a PWI.
Most people did.
Jordan, what is your zone of genius?
Oh my gosh, my favorite phrase to talk about. I honestly think that my zone of genius is meeting needs and finding ways to meet needs. I used to think that my zone of genius was in design and creativity, and then I left that space and realized that my zone of genius is providing needs for people. Outside of running my stationery companies, I also sit on the board of a nonprofit. I sat on the board of that nonprofit since 2020, and that's all about meeting student needs in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I'm not even native to Fayetteville, North Carolina. I was the first non-native to sit on the board of the 2-6 projects, but I got asked to like do some graphic design work for them, and we were meeting needs for students. And now my role has shifted and evolved as my passions have shifted and evolved, but I still stay on the board because the goal is meeting needs. And even like in my personal life, my goal is to always make sure that people that I love have the things that they need to be successful in whatever they want to be successful in. And so I think that would be my zone of genius, is figuring out how to meet needs. And if it's something I don't know how to do, I'm going to go learn how to do it to make sure that the gaps are filled and the needs are met. And I think that comes from my mother being a teacher. Her background is education. I just grew up watching that, and I knew the education sector was absolutely not for me, but I wanted to be able to like reinvent that same thing and like find a way to meet the needs of people without having to do it in the classroom, because God bless America's teachers, I'm absolutely not strong enough for that space.
If you lost everything and you had to rebuild your business, what industry would you rebuild and why?
If I lost everything and had to rebuild, I absolutely would probably go back to graphic design first. I think I'd always start there. I think that space allows me to hone my creativity, and honing that creativity is what has like given birth to every other venture that I've taken on, is the design space. I learned how to run a business and like learn the nitty gritty of all aspects of running a business, from design, even like transitioning into like a 9-to-5 career for a while. the roots of that and the way that I was able, my first ever role in a 9-to-5 space was a senior level role. And I was able to get that role because of my like fervent design background. I think understanding how to build a creative business or a service-based business from scratch is the launching pad for so many other things. For me, it'd probably be design, but I know without a doubt, it would definitely be a service-based business. I think learning how to serve a customer is the foundation of every great business venture, is knowing how to serve customers. And for me, I learned how to do that via taking on a bunch of freelance clients, and also got to learn about so many other different types of businesses because I was creating branding for so many different types of businesses. And so that was really the foundation of my education. And if I lost everything tomorrow, I'd probably start right back there and see what it turned into. It might not even, I can't say it would turn into a paper company again, but I know it would probably turn into something amazing and something fulfilling and something that I was passionate about, just in a completely different way.
I've heard a statement, your why should make you cry. Why do you do what you do?
I do what I do, honestly, because I think it's fun. I love a challenge. And I think most people, like, if they looked at my story, they would think, and I think at certain points of my life, my why was, a lot of it had to do with like my brother. And then I reached a point in my life where I was like, I don't want to live my life to make someone who's no longer here proud. I want to live my life to do things that I enjoy. And so now I'm all about really figuring out the best ways to bring myself joy. And like, that's my why, is doing things that I enjoy. For me, completing challenges, like checking boxes, I love that. And then I love doing things that I never thought I could. And so that's my why, because that brings me so much joy. When I shut down my freelance business about 2 years ago, I shut it down because I had a realization one day. I was like, I'm not happy doing this anymore. Like, I'm actually kind of quite miserable. And so like, I want to transition into the 9-to-5 space because I want to do something that makes me happier. And so all of my decisions right now are pretty much led by making the decisions that'll make myself happy, because I realize that I don't think that there's any age on entrepreneurship. I don't think there's any time on entrepreneurship. But I think that if you figure out how to center joy first and foremost in your life, you will always find success alongside that. And I didn't want to wake up 50 years from now and be like, wow, I was really miserable all this time, but like, I built a bunch of businesses. I didn't want that. I wanted to know that I built a life that made me happy. And for me, a life that makes me happy is a life that always heavily involves entrepreneurship. But I tell people all the time, like, your why is going to change. And when your why changes, or you realize your business is going to change, can you drop that and pivot into something else that makes you happy? And I think that'll keep you happy, but I also think that's what keeps you wealthy, is understanding the art of the pivot and the art of the importance of pursuing passion fervently. And I think people build businesses all the time that they hate. And I don't think that they ever see the type of success they truly want because they're miserable in doing what they're doing. And I think figuring out how to center joy, everything I do is centered around joy. Does this make me happy? Is this still serving me? And is this going to live me the life I want? And if I don't know the next steps to take, I'm going to choose what makes me happiest. And for me right now, that's paper. I love paper products. And doing that, and if there's a day where like paper products no longer make me happy, I know that I will swiftly exit. I think entrepreneurs, especially Black entrepreneurs, are taught to run their businesses until they run their bodies into the ground and until they've given every single bone and ligament that they have to it. And I think that Black entrepreneurship doesn't have to be synonymous with struggling through it. And I think that if you're struggling in a way that like it's no longer serving you, then it's okay to walk away from that thing and do something else. And you never know if you'll get brought. It might come back full circle. I left my business because I was working myself to the bones and I was tired and I hated it. And I went and I got a 9-to-5 job and I pivoted into that space. And getting that job allowed me to I purchased my first home at 25. And the type of home that I have, I built my house, literally, I watched my house be built from the foundations. Like when I took pictures here, it was just grass. They hadn't even leveled it yet. But my 9-to-5 job gave me the ability to do that. And now I have this beautiful home for my business that I'm now transitioning back into. But launching into stores, I was able to launch into stores in a matter of months. But I had the backing and the security of a 9-to-5 role. And I didn't have to bleed and pour everything in me out to have a successful business, because I was willing to pivot and walk away when I wasn't happy. And I think that's giving me everything that I have now, is because I'm willing to walk away when I'm not happy. And I think Black entrepreneurs often aren't given the freedom to do that. And they aren't given the encouragement to do that. People are like, no, you just got to stick it out, really fight till the death. And I was like, you don't have to die for your business. Like that's not necessary. Like, do you have to work hard? Do you have to grind? Yes. Do I think that like people should be willing to die and go broke to save the business? If you're not passionate about it, no. If you're passionate about it, pour everything you've got into it. If the passion is burned out, write an exit plan and figure out what's next. And I promise you, all of the things and all of the businesses and all of the entrepreneurial success will come back to you in one form or another. I never thought that I'd have another business that was successful like my freelance business was. And so I held on to it so much, like past the point of like when my happiness decided, I just like dug my claws into it. And once I was willing to walk away from that, not only was my life more fulfilled, but now I have a paper company that's like in stores and on shelves. And this is a company that I was like putting on the back burner to run my other business. And so I think like lead with joy. And if you lead with joy, everything else will come.
Who's your ideal customer?
Ooh, my ideal customer for at least like my current set of products is the everyday person. I want people to understand that planning is for the everyday. It's for the mundane situations. It's not, I think people like a lot of people create planners for students. I didn't want to create a planner for students. I wanted to create a planner for like people who just did not know what was going on half the time. Like people are just floating through life, like doing their jobs, the regular everyday person. Like that's my archetype of person. That's who I want to buy my products. That's who I want to enjoy my products. That's who I want to really find value in what I'm creating, as I want to create for the everyday person. I think it would have been really, really easy to come up with like a planner or to like market towards entrepreneurs because that's what I was, but that's not everybody's story. And I didn't think that I could create a product to benefit them the most. I wanted the everyday person who could not keep up with their day-to-day tasks to understand that there was a space for them and that someone was going to create something that was just for them.
How do you celebrate your wins?
Ooh, what a loaded question. I am terrible at it. In the current way that I celebrate my wins is learning to let other people celebrate me and learning to let other people pour into me. I've struggled for a really, really long time with the concept of celebrating myself. I felt like I would check off an accomplishment and I would just move to the next one. And I think a lot of that has to do with like the era in which like a lot of my accomplishments were like happening was COVID. And so like I graduated college and like there wasn't really any fanfare because like we're all locked in the house. And so I was in this like period for like 2 years, a period that I'm really just now coming out of, where like I would have these major wins and I'd just be like, okay, like, great, like, what are we doing next? And so this is a period in my life where I'm learning, like really learning to celebrate. And so like my products launched into stores and I was intentional about like taking time, like go see them on shelves because most people will start businesses and they would dream of getting their products in a national retailer. And they will never see that dream come to fruition. So really like taking time to like go see my products in stores and like, I want to make the Instagram post and I want to host the dinner with my friends where I celebrate. And so I think it's right now it's very like in very small ways, finding ways to celebrate myself, which like I said, for me, the act of like going to see them was a celebration or like I went and bought one and I kept the receipt and initially like it was just in a bag. My significant other was like, you need to frame that. You need to frame it. You need to put it up on a wall. You need to be able to look at that for the rest of your life. Like, don't just buy it and then like toss it in a bag with the rest of your notebooks. You bought that from a national retailer that's storing your products, put it in a frame, put it on a wall and like let it hold its face. It reminds me of, if you've ever seen SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs' like first dollar that like he always had. I think for me, this is like, I made money in my business before when I'm sure, but like, this is my first dollar. This is my Roman Empire. Like, this is the story that I'll always be able to look back on and remember, like, you got to walk into a store where the employees didn't even really know who you were and be like, that product right there on that shelf, that's mine. And I created that. And like, I designed every single page in that notebook and I designed the logos and I picked out the leather cover based on how it felt. And I chose the exact color code. Every single thing about that belongs to me. And I want to see it on these shelves. And I'm going to take the time to be really awkward and like go take a picture in front of my shelf, even though people are staring at me because like, this is mine. And when someone stares at me, they're like, oh, and I'm like, this is mine. I created this. And like I want everybody to know that like, I created this product that's on these shelves. Like I want the whole world to know. I'm going to tell everybody about it, even when it feels like awkward or scary or like weird. And even when you think nobody else cares, other people don't have to care. I care because I gave birth to this business. I gave birth to this. And if no one else is going to like cheer on the baby when it takes its first steps, I'm going to cheer on the baby.
And you know what's powerful about that, Jordan, is the fact that not only are you celebrating you, and I think that's brilliant that you're going to the shelves and seeing it and purchasing, and you're reinvesting back into the business. And I absolutely agree. You need to frame that, box it, or whatever. You know how they have the flags in the box, or
Yeah,
yeah,
shout out.
go to Michael's or somewhere or Hobby Lobby and have it framed. So yeah, absolutely. There's so many brands and businesses that are dominating. Talk about a brand or a business that's dominating that you admire and why.
Oh, so many. I think if I had to pick one off the top of my head, of course, I think it would be Fenty Beauty. I spent a lot of time in background, like in the makeup space. The first business I ever started, I was actually a freelance makeup artist when I was in college. And I think watching like beauty brands be built in that way is just one of my things. And I also think like the work that they did for representation of like Black women in the beauty space, I think was really, really cool to watch. And so I know for me, that's like one of my absolute favorite brands that I've ever seen. I think that's my go-to when I want to be inspired by a brand. I'm always going to Fenty because it was like the first time that I could find my foundation shade in stores, and all of that brand created a lot of first for a lot of Black women. And it was like one of those like, oh, I found the first beauty product that I ever really loved, and it was a Fenty product. And I think if I ever wanted to emulate anything and I'd be like, oh, I found the first notebook I ever really loved, I would love if that was my company for people. And I think the ability to build like a cult following behind something is like something I really, really admire.
Jordan, if you conducted this interview, what is the one question you would have asked yourself? I want you to ask the question and answer it.
I think that my favorite question, or like the question I love to hear, is what's next? I love like having to answer what's next for me. And I think the reason that I like the question of what's next is because I think I have a pretty non-traditional answer. And my answer is always, I do not know what's next. And I honestly do not care what happens next. I am really letting my business take on a space of its own right now and figuring out what happens like day by day. And so I don't know what the plan for the squared looks like a year from now. I don't know what it looks like 5 years from now. And at some point, and I think a lot of it was led by the fact that, like I said, I graduated in 2020, is I was one of those people that had written out all of these very intricate life plans for myself. And I was going to do this by the time I was 25, and I was going to do this by the time that I was 30. And as soon as I graduated, I was going to go work at like this big tech company. And I knew exactly what company I was going to. And then COVID happened and all of my plans like kind of blew up into dust. And I had to figure out what was happening next. And I was so overwhelmed and I was so stressed out. And I was like crying every day and I was miserable because none of my life plans were coming to fruition because of something that was entirely out of my control. And at some point, it clicked that you can make plans all you want, but they don't matter. Like the plans that you create for yourself are not really in your control. And so I learned to stop creating plans. Now, obviously, that does not mean like I keep a to-do list. There are always tasks involved. But these like intricate plans for my life and for my businesses, I learned to let go of. And so when people ask like, what's next, find out, like, join me on the journey and find out and see. Because I think at the beginning of the year, if you'd asked me what was next for the company, I would not have put launching into a paper source stores. That was not on my list. It's not something I thought was going to happen this year. It's not something I put on the plan, but the opportunity presented itself. I ran full force at it and now it happens. And we have a couple other retailers like loaded up and on the way. And that wasn't on the plan at the beginning of this year at all. That's not what was on my what's next. And so what's next is looking forward to what's next, even if I don't know what it is.
We've come to the part of our show. It's called Rapid Round of Fun. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to give me very quick answers. If there's something you desire not to answer, feel free to say pass. Are you ready for the Rapid Round of Fun?
Yes.
Give me one word that describes Jordan.
Rambunctious.
Your favorite comfort food.
Ooh, favorite comfort food right now is pasta.
You relax doing what?
Going to get massages.
The last movie you saw.
The Marvels.
Your favorite singer or rapper.
Meg Thee Stallion.
Your favorite dance song.
Work by Rihanna.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
Chicken tenders, absolutely. I have to have.
Your ideal car.
Ooh, I have my ideal car. It's a Kia K5 with the white exterior and the red interior with the panoramic sunroof.
Work out or hit the couch?
Ooh, absolutely hit the couch. I wanted to lie, but no, it's hit the couch.
Jordan Nash, thank you so much for joining us on Black Entrepreneur Experience Podcast. Before we let you go, share with our audience the best way for them to connect with you and to do business with you. And feel free to leave all your social media handles.
Yes. So the best way to connect with me is definitely online. Visit us on Instagram at the Square Root Paper Co. Our DMs are always open. I love to chat and I really love product suggestions. So if there's something you want to see, shoot me a message. Everything's designed in-house, so I could probably get it cranked out for you. We're also over on TikTok, also at the Square Root Paper. I'm getting used to that platform. It makes me feel very, very old because I don't know how to use it that well. And then if you want to grab yourself a notebook or a planner, we're running some sales throughout the end of the year. So feel free to pop by our site, which is thesquaredpaper.com, and see what type of deal you can get yourself up until the end of the year. Yeah, that's how to find us online.
Thank you, Jordan. That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.